The Haruspex, a coalition-class medical frigate with nearly 1,000 trauma cases logged in her databanks, had never seen anything like it. Not the twisted remains of the salvaged shuttle, crumpled and folded like a discarded food wrapper. Not the scorched, vacuum-sealed pilot's seat that arrived on the trauma deck with its occupant still strapped in. No, it was the man inside the blood-soaked Terran, whose left arm looked like it had folded in 2 different directions, and whose right leg was splinted with half a chair and a coiled charger cable, who defied all previous medical expectations. Dr. Vektal, the ship's chief trauma surgeon, swept into the triage bay moments after the siren call. A Xantari by birth, his 6 ocular nodules blinked asynchronously as he scanned the readouts. Hemothorax, comminuted fracture of the radius and tibia, dislocated shoulder, cracked sternum, full-body contusions. Vektal prepared the cortical override standard coalition procedure when pain exceeds neural stability thresholds, only to have the human bat his hand away. "No override," the man croaked, voice thick with blood and restraint. "I'm lucid." Vektal's fingers paused midair. "Lucidity is not the concern. You are in acute pain. Sedation is mandatory for stabilization." "Pass," the man Reese, according to the log, grunted through clenched teeth. "Bones grow back." Vektal froze. "I beg your clarification?" he asked, switching to Terran Standard to ensure no semantic distortion. "Bones," Reese repeated, as if this were not a conversation but a fact of nature. "Grow. Back." What came next was a whirlwind of motion. Vektal directed his med team with military precision. Internal bleeds were staunched, IV nutrition lines threaded, and Reese's collapsed lung reinflated under sealant foam. But when the skeletal reinforcements were readied flexibly filaments designed to fuse to fractured bone ends, Reese lifted a single shaky hand. "Don't need it," he murmured, pale but unyielding. "You'll lose mechanical function, risk infection. Without reinforcement, your healing time could exceed 80 planetary days." "Still don't want it. Your radius is powder, your tibia is in 3 segments." "I know," Reese rasped, "and I'll grow it back." At first, Vektal catalogued the comment under cultural euphemism, some Terran bravado, poorly timed. But as the hours unfolded and advanced imaging began scanning cell activity, anomalies emerged. Osteoblast activity abnormally high. Microscopic lattice structures knitting along the fracture edge. No biomodulators, no enhancement, and yet... Vektal leaned back from the terminal and ran his secondary digits down his jawline, stunned. The human's bones were already healing, not accelerated by artificial means, naturally, brutally, painfully, and yet visibly regenerating. He triple-checked the diagnostic software. Then he swapped scanners. Then he manually calibrated the spectrometric filters. Each time the result came back the same. The bones were growing back, slowly, imperfectly, but unmistakably. Vektal stood in stunned silence as the truth began to crystallize. Reese had meant it literally. 2 hours later, Vektal sat alone in his private office, sifting through every shred of Terran physiology the Coalition had approved for interspecies medical use. Nothing in the official data mentioned spontaneous osteoregeneration without implants. Nothing about long-term repair via unmodified biology. Yet Reese lay in bed, no sedation, just grimacing through his breaths, bones reknitting the way trees mend bark. In the hours that followed, Vektal had the medbot run serial scans every standard hour. The signs were slow but unmistakable. Endogenous repair proteins were present at levels usually seen only in surgical stim protocols. Reese wasn't just healing, he was adapting. On day 2, the swelling worsened along his tibia and CRP markers suggested an infection might be setting in. Vektal administered IV antibiotics and prepped for possible debridement. Reese took the news with a slow blink. "Had worse. Just watch for necrosis. You speak of tissue death as if it were a seasonal flu." Reese's face twitched in something resembling humor. "Been through worse winters." By day 3, whispers started among the medical staff. The Haruspex wasn't used to long-term organic healing. Its patients were stabilized, regenerated, fitted with bionics or exosupports, and offloaded. None of the other species in the coalition elected for old-fashioned tissue regrowth. Too painful, too slow, too uncertain. Yet Reese lay in the recovery bay like a relic, refusing even basic fusion grafts. That night, Vectal reviewed the intake hololog again. He rewound the crash footage, the shuttle disintegrating against a failed docking array, tumbling twice, then slamming into the lower hull. Reese had stayed at the controls until final impact, absorbing the worst of it. Why? On day 5, the medbay cooled slightly. Ship's internal temperature regulation shifted for the Arvanth envoy boarding in Sector 4. The Arvanth were fastidious, cool-blooded beings with cultural taboos against unaugmented biology. Vectal didn't consider them until the diplomat, Envoy Laris, entered the medbay. She stood stiffly near Reese's bed, observing the readings with veiled discomfort. "How long will the Terran remain here?" she asked, her voice cold. "He is recovering. Naturally. No augmentation?" "None, by his own request." She stared at the readouts a moment longer. "That level of trauma would kill one of mine." "He is fortunate, yes." Lares gave him a long, unreadable look. "Or engineered." Vectal stiffened. "You suspect bioengineering?" "I suspect anomaly," she said, "and I will file a formal inquiry." From there, the whispers became murmurs, and murmurs edged towards suspicion. By week 2, Reese was out of critical care but still bedridden, his right leg immobilized in a soft brace, left arm propped by a sling. His vitals had stabilized, but Vectal noted something deeply unusual in the updated imaging. The fracture lines had blurred. Not just healed, they were denser, thickened. Increased mineralization. Secondary lamellar bone. The sites of trauma were rebuilding stronger. Adaptive regrowth. Vectal froze mid-scroll. That was a trait the Coalition had only documented in ancient pre-sapient organisms. An evolutionary fossil. "Reese," he asked that evening, sitting beside the bed, "do you understand what is happening in your bones?" Reese shifted, his voice dry. "Yeah, stress fractures come back harder. Wolf's Law. It's how we adapt." Vectal hesitated. "You've done this before?" "Broke both arms falling off a cliff at 16. Wasn't brave then either, just stubborn." The words stayed with Vectal long after he left the bay. That night, curiosity shifted to obsession. He pulled every archive he could access on Terran trauma recovery, then bypassed several clearance layers with his rank to request deeper files. Most were redacted. But then, buried in an old Coalition dossier marked obsolescence embargoed, he found it. A report from Earth's initial pre-entry evaluation. A covert trial, 23 standard years ago. Simulated combat skirmishes between Earth and control species. All humans survived. All other species failed. Recommendation: do not admit Earth. Too volatile, too durable. Psychological variance extreme. Pain tolerance abnormal. Risk of contagion by example. 2 years later, Earth was quietly inducted. No public fanfare. No cultural gala. Just quiet onboarding. Vectal leaned back from the screen. His hands trembled. They hadn't invited Earth for diplomacy. They had contained it. And Reese. Reese was a reminder. When Vectal visited him again on week 4, Reese was in agony from joint reconditioning. His knee had begun stiffening due to lack of movement, and the pain was grinding. He refused nerve blocks. Vectal pulled up a chair, sat quietly for a while. "Why are you doing this?" he asked at last. Reese exhaled hard. "Because someone needs to remember." "Remember what?" "That we don't survive because it's easy. We survive because we do the hard thing anyway." Vectal swallowed. He would have to speak with Envoy Lares again soon. The Arvanth were preparing their formal challenge. The Coalition Council would question his data. But in this moment, he only watched the Terran struggle through another breath, sweat rolling down his brow, jaw clenched not in bravado but will. And for the first time in his medical career, Vectal felt small. Reese's recovery passed into its 5th week, with little ceremony but growing unease. By now, most species would have transitioned to exo-assisted mobilization or received full skeletal synth grafts. The Coalition medical frigate Harrispex had dozens of such recoveries logged: standard, efficient, sanitary. Yet in room 7B, a Terran lay strapped with minimal support, enduring a grind of old-fashioned healing, and people were beginning to talk. Not in the open, never with words that could be archived, but in the pauses between shift changes and the glances exchanged over sterile lunch trays. The way nurses lingered outside his room just a moment too long. The awkward silence when someone asked why he refused the tech. Maybe he doesn't trust us, one junior staff member whispered to Vektal during a late check-in. Or perhaps, Vektal replied evenly, he trusts something older than our technology. The scans kept telling a quiet, infuriating truth. Rhys's radius had grown over 4 centimeters of new bone. The tibia, once fragmented, now displayed bridging callus. Thick and irregular, but there, functional. And more disturbing was the density. Vektal had run comparative scans between Rhys's healing limb and archived data from pre-injury checkups. The regrown sections were showing increased strength, measurably so, not just healed, improved. Envoy Laress returned in week 6. This time, she didn't hover silently at the doorway. She entered the diagnostics bay and requested a full audit of Rhys's medical file. You cannot authorize that, Vektal said flatly. I've secured a conditional warrant from the Coalition Oversight Committee. You've bypassed shipboard authority. She raised a smooth, mottled brow. The authority of a single ship ends when the implications affect the Coalition. Vektal stood his ground. There is no evidence of bioengineering. His genome is base pattern. I've confirmed it myself. Laress didn't flinch. That's not the point anymore. Then what is the point? She looked at him then, eyes hollow with something deeper than accusation. My brother served in the skirmish trials. The ones your archive pretended didn't happen. He piloted a Krashari gunship during a simulated crash scenario. 4 subjects went in, 3 humans, 1 Arvinth. Vektal's skin tightened. Laress. Only the humans crawled out, she said, and when he did not, the Coalition told my family he had malfunctioned under stress. I didn't know, Vektal said quietly. Neither did I. Not until I read the redacted memo buried in a random AI scrub queue last cycle. Her voice sharpened. So you'll forgive me if I ask what exactly humans are meant to survive. Vektal didn't argue. He watched her leave and wondered, not for the first time, if Rhys understood the echoes of his own presence. That evening, as the lights dimmed to simulate planetary dusk, Vektal sat beside Rhys again. The human had progressed to crutch-assisted standing, though his gait was still stilted, uneven. Vektal noticed he no longer winced when rising, but he exhaled slowly, as if each movement was negotiated rather than instinctive. Tell me something, Vektal asked as Rhys practiced a short walk loop. Why do you refuse pain mitigation? Rhys paused mid-step. His crutches steadied against the floor's traction grid. I'm not a masochist, he said finally. It's not pride, it's calibration. Vektal tilted his head. Calibration? Rhys lowered himself carefully onto the bed. Pain tells me how far I've come. When it dulls, I know something's healing. When it spikes, I know to back off. Drugs lie. Pain doesn't. Vektal blinked slowly. That is primitive. Rhys gave a tired half-smile. So are bones. Flashbacks crept in during Rhys's sleep cycles. In week 7, Vektal stayed late and observed his patient doze off during post-therapy exhaustion. Within minutes, Rhys's vitals shifted. Heart rate climbed, respiratory rhythm changed. His fingers twitched. Vektal turned the sound off the holomonitors and just watched. On the bed, Rhys mumbled under his breath. No stay-down traps not cleared. The dream lasted 11 minutes. Rhys woke with a start, drenched in sweat, eyes unfocused. You were speaking, Vektal said gently, offering a hydration pod. Rhys took it but said nothing. His hands trembled. Combat memory? Vektal asked. Does it matter? It might. If your pain tolerance was learned, not innate, that changes how we understand it. Rhys wiped his brow. Most of us learn it. Nobody's born with this. Then, softer, almost to himself, it's not something you want. Just something you don't want to need anymore. By week 8, Vektal's reports were drawing internal scrutiny. A communication from the Coalition Biological Ethics Division arrived under seal. Vectal was instructed to halt all further tissue sampling. The reasoning? Potential violation of Article 5 evolutionary weaponization. They were afraid now. Not just of Reese, but of what he represented. Not a weapon, but a precedent. A species that could suffer this much injury and still choose not to adapt through technology. Why? It gnawed at Vectal as he observed yet another therapy session. Reese moved better now, slow but deliberate. Scar tissue had begun to form where internal bruising hadn't fully resolved. The regenerated bone wasn't graceful, it was thick, gnarled, raw. But it was his. Vectal understood that, in some quiet way, Reese needed to own his healing. It wasn't masochism, it was identity. Near the start of week 9, Reese faltered. A fever spiked overnight, subtle at first, then sharp. Inflammatory markers surged. The medbots pinged Vectal directly. Localized infection near the tibial site. They moved fast. Vectal and his surgical assistant made a decision within the hour to excise necrotic tissue. Reese resisted initial sedation, but the fever eventually left him too delirious to protest. The procedure lasted 90 minutes. They cleared the infection and reset the surrounding bone margins. When Reese woke, his first words were, "Is the regrowth gone?" Vectal shook his head. "Only the compromised portion. You'll rebuild it again. The process has already resumed." Reese leaned back, silent for a long time. "I thought I could dodge that bullet," he said. "Guess not. You minimized your risk. That is not failure. I hate the setbacks more than the pain. You measure time differently." Reese turned his head. "You ever break anything?" Vectal blinked. "I have sustained superficial dermal tears, a strained tentacle during a lab evacuation once." Reese chuckled dryly. "Try not being able to climb stairs for 2 months." Week 10 brought questions from other patients. A Selnari diplomat recovering from a spinal accident asked Vectal during rounds, "Why doesn't the Terran accept exo repair?" "He believes in natural healing," Vectal replied. "But that's barbaric. Is it barbaric to endure something your ancestors mastered?" The diplomat didn't answer. Later, a younger nurse confided in Vectal. "I used to think humans were reckless. Now I think they're just designed differently." That night, Vectal pulled up the original coalition motion on Earth's admission. He read it again, slowly, as if the language might change under his eyes. Nothing did. Earth had been deemed a risk, then quickly accepted under political guise. Not out of trust, but caution. A biological system that could tolerate pain this intense, choose it, even was not just unusual, it was destabilizing. And Reese? Reese had known all along. On day 76, Reese walked without crutches for the first time. It was brief, slow. His steps were uneven and clearly painful, but he made it from one end of the recovery bay to the other, unaided. Vectal stood in the doorway, silent. Reese caught his eye and smiled, not bravado, but something else. "See?" he said. "Told you they grow back." Vectal stepped inside, folding his hands. "You could have healed weeks ago with reinforcement," he said. "You chose this." "Yeah. Why?" Reese sat down heavily, breathing hard. His shirt clung with sweat. "Because you all needed a reminder." Vectal tilted his head. "Of what?" Reese didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, eyes tired but steady. "That we survive. Not because it's smart, not because it's clean, because we don't quit. You think that's scary, but it's just how we are." Vectal felt his pulse slow. The weight of everything they'd seen, everything Reese had endured, all condensed into one unsentimental truth. It wasn't about strength. It was about refusal. The refusal to stop, to surrender, even to heal faster when healing slowly made the point clearer. Reese didn't endure the pain for pride. He endured it for history. And the Haruspecs would remember. So would Vectal. In the thick silence of the Haruspecs' diplomatic hall, tension brewed not with shouting but with the soft hum of overlapping sub-translator nodes. The Coalition Review Board had convened a closed inquiry aboard the ship, and for the first time in Vectal's tenure, he found himself seated not behind a scalpel but under scrutiny. He was not formally accused. Not yet. But the questions, some carefully phrased, others deliberately sharp, hinted at something darker than mere professional oversight. "Doctor," began Overseer Delth, a Soren known for his impeccable neutrality and cavernous memory. "Your patient, Reese, has undergone 11 weeks of what appears to be willful self-denial of medical standard protocols. Why did you permit this?" "I provided alternatives," Vectal said. He exercised his rights under Coalition patient autonomy statutes. Even as a security risk, that status was assigned retroactively. Loresse, seated across the table, didn't flinch. "Respectfully, that's only because we didn't know what he was until too late." "Which is?" Vectal asked quietly. Loresse's lip curled. "An evolutionary outlier, possibly a proto-adaptive class 3. The room shifted uneasily. Even Delth's upper antenna twitched. That designation was more than taxonomy. It implied latent weaponization. Vectal straightened. "You've reviewed my scans. You've seen the data. There are no implants, no genetic alterations. He is entirely unmodified." "That's not the question," Laris said. "The question is why a baseline Terran can survive injuries that would cripple or kill every other sentient species. And why, given the choice not to suffer, he chose to," Delth added. No one said the word threat, but it hung there. Meanwhile, Reese, still stiff-limbed but mobile, had begun venturing beyond the medbay. He didn't go far, but his presence disrupted routine in subtle, compounding ways. In the main corridor, a Celtari child stared openly as Reese limped by. The boy's guardian quickly pulled him aside, murmuring something about organic survivorship pathology. Reese caught only fragments, smiled wryly, and kept walking. At the galley, he requested simple rations: protein, carbs, salts, no synth flavors or bone supplements. When the nutrition officer raised an eyebrow, Reese shrugged. "Stomach's behind the curve. Gotta feed the scaffolding." No one laughed. Not because it wasn't funny, but because the words scaffolding and stomach coming from him sounded more like construction blueprints than biology. Later, during one of Vectal's unspoken observations, Reese paused beside a viewing port. He leaned against the frame, eyes locked on the starfield. "You know what hurt the most?" he asked without turning. "Wasn't the bones, not even the infection." Vectal didn't answer. He waited. "It was realizing I scared people just by healing." "That wasn't your intention?" Reese shook his head slowly. "I thought maybe it would. I don't know. Impress. But I saw that Arvanth child flinch when I sat down in the waiting room yesterday. She looked at me like I had claws." Vectal approached. "You do not, but you have something just as alarming." "Which is?" "Recovery. Not as a process, as a declaration." Reese let out a quiet exhale. "That's one hell of a declaration." In week 12, Vectal received an encrypted package from a private channel. Dr. Sarvin, a retired Coalition biologist who'd once served on the Earth pre-induction panel. The message was short. Sarvin wasn't supposed to speak. He no longer held clearances, but the file enclosed was damning. It was the full skirmish report, unredacted. 18 simulations, varied environments, vacuum exposure, gravitational distortions, blunt trauma, chemical injury. In every scenario, human subjects outlasted their counterparts. Not by strategy, not by shielding, by refusal to die. One case showed a Terran pilot crawling from a ruptured test craft with compound leg fractures and a collapsed lung. The footage was grainy, but the timestamp proved it. He survived 4 standard hours without aid. His partner, a Rhynak, expired in minutes. The humans didn't win. They outlasted. And that, Sarvin noted, was the true risk. They would not be conquered. Not because they were stronger, but because they refused to stop. At the end of the report, Sarvin had added one handwritten line: "Pain is not their enemy. It is their measure." Vectal sat in stunned silence. All the threads, the dossier, the healing, the rumors, even Reese's silence interlocked into something terrible and unspoken. This wasn't a man healing from trauma. It was a species proving they could. Later that week, the Arvanth envoy made their move. Loresse filed a formal demand for a biological ethics review of Earth's induction. If successful, It could lead to temporary suspension of Earth's coalition status, pending a full evaluation of their evolutionary profile. In simple terms, humanity could be exiled, watched, contained again. Vektal was summoned to testify. Inside the chamber, under the blank stares of 8 species representatives, he spoke with practiced calm. No biological tampering was found. No regulatory breach occurred. The healing process of Lieutenant Reese followed an endogenous osteogenic pathway, completely natural. Lores pressed, "But isn't that unnatural by coalition species standards?" "Yes," Vektal admitted, "but not unethical. We do not exile species for surviving differently." Yet his recovery unnerved your staff. So did the first avian sentient we treated, because she regrew her retina. Are we to ban adaptation? Lores's voice chilled. Are you comfortable with a coalition species who, when injured, refuses help to show you how dangerous they are? Vektal hesitated, then said, "Number." A murmur rippled through the chamber. "I am not comfortable. I am humbled, because he reminded me what pain tolerance used to mean, and what survival once required." He paused, then added, "If we forget what endurance looks like, we lose the context for our compassion." The room fell into a slow silence. Delth recorded his notes, antenna still. No vote came that day. But the pressure eased. On the eve of week 13, Reese sat with Vektal in the now empty therapy room, stretching his knee under slow mechanical assistance. The crutches were gone. He moved like someone 50% healed and 100% worn. Vektal handed him a hydration pod. "I read the skirmish reports," he said. Reese nodded slowly. "Figured someone would." "You knew about them?" "Bits. Enough. I saw too many eyebrows go up whenever one of us got back up after taking a hit." "You chose this recovery not out of bravery," Vektal said, more observation than question. Reese leaned back in the seat, sighing through his teeth. "Nope. I chose it because you'd remember it." There was a quiet pause, filled only by the machine's quiet whir. "Does it always feel like this?" Vektal asked. Reese glanced at him. "Like what?" "Like healing is proof of something." Reese didn't answer for a while. Then he smiled faintly. "Number, usually it just feels like hell." Vektal's secondary eyes blinked. "But you did it anyway." "Yeah," Reese said, "because that's what we do." When Reese walked into the galley unaided, several species stopped eating. No one said anything, but they noticed. Not because he limped, because he limped and smiled. And his bones had grown back. By the beginning of week 14, Reese's name had disappeared from the active patient log, but not from the whispers echoing through the decks of the haruspex. The Coalition medical frigate had seen thousands of casualties, entire species catalogued and treated with precision and impartiality. But Reese had altered something more fundamental than protocol. He had changed how pain was perceived. Vektal noticed it first in the other patients, those who once demanded rapid cellular reconstitution or sedation for routine sprains. Now they paused, asked for second opinions, tolerated discomfort just a little longer. A young Drenari civilian, who had previously refused to walk without full support, surprised everyone by limping unassisted across the recovery deck. When asked why, she only replied, "The Terran did worse." Even the staff had shifted. Less reliance on automation. More questions. Curiosity, not fear. The Coalition hadn't exiled Earth. Not yet. Lores's motion for full biological ethics review was shelved for further inquiry, a polite way of diffusing a powder keg with silence. But tension still hung like the low hum of a ship's power core present, barely audible but impossible to ignore. And Reese? Reese was finally walking with a full, if uneven, stride. Vektal found him one morning in the observation deck, sitting alone with a thin blanket draped over his shoulders. Outside, a planet rotated slowly below, hues of sapphire and dusty copper blending in a mesmerizing horizon. The doctor sat down beside him, keeping his distance. "Your discharge papers were finalized," Vektal said. Reese nodded. "Yeah, got them last night. Kinda weird." "Why?" "Been lying flat so long I forgot what it's like to go anywhere." Vektal studied him for a moment. His gait was no longer painful but still bore the signature of trauma, a slight drag in the right leg, a subtle torque in his posture, compensations that would fade only with time and relentless therapy. How long until full function? Vectel asked. Reese smirked. Another month or two. 6 weeks if I'm stubborn, which I usually am. There was a pause. Then Vectel asked something that had been pressing on him for days. Why didn't you explain it? The pain, the healing, the reason behind it. You let them think it was bravado. Reese looked at the planet below. Because if I explained it, they'd rationalize it, classify it, fit it into some nice, neat protocol so they could ignore it again. And now? Now it sticks. He glanced at Vectel. Because they felt it. Not in their bones, maybe, but somewhere else. Vectel exhaled softly. They did. In the weeks following Reese's recovery, the Coalition Council quietly circulated new memos, internal, high clearance only, advisory notices, not orders. Reevaluate species with natural regeneration capacity. Consider long-term psychological impacts of unsuppressed pain adaptation. Investigate terrestrial evolution models as baselines for pain resilience. None of them mentioned Reese by name, but everyone knew. Back on the Harrispex, Vectel prepared a research log, an internal report, not for publication. It bore a simple title, Human Osteogenic Recovery in High Trauma Conditions. He documented the phases, the progression, the setbacks, and complications. The infection scare, the dense callus formation, the refusal of reinforcement, the slow realignment of psychological expectations across the medical staff. And at the very end, he wrote something that broke from data. There are thresholds of pain that define species. For some, it's the point of collapse. For others, it's the moment they call for help. For the Terran, it appears the threshold is the point where others begin to watch. The ship docked at Ekrion IV, a neutral station on the edge of safe space. Reese disembarked slowly, carrying a lightweight duffel and wearing a standard-issue recovery sleeve over his formerly shattered arm. Vectel followed him down the corridor toward the shuttle bays. You'll need rehab centers on the surface, Vectel said. Already booked. And you're sure you want terrestrial gravity right away? It may delay? I know, Reese cut in gently. But I want to feel the weight, every ounce of it. He stopped at the bay doors, then turned. I wasn't trying to scare anyone. I know, Vectel said. I wasn't trying to be a symbol either. I know. Reese looked at him a long moment. Then what do you think I was doing? Vectel took his time. No monitors to read, no bone density to assess, just a man standing with an arm that shouldn't work and a leg that shouldn't hold weight, and yet he stood. I think, Vectel said, you were reminding us what pain means when it's not sanitized, that healing isn't supposed to be comfortable, that survival isn't elegant. Reese nodded once, then gave a brief 2-finger salute as he stepped onto the transport pad. Vectel watched him go, the fading shimmer of the pad, reflecting off the sterile walls. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Then he walked back to medbay. Later that cycle, as Vectel passed the recovery wing, he caught sight of a young Vohari male, newly admitted for a fractured wrist. The injury was minor, treatable in under 2 hours with standard regen. The boy was gripping his splinted arm, sweating. His guardian paced nearby. Shall we proceed with the synth bond? The attending medic asked. The boy hesitated. What's the alternative? He whispered. Well, you could let it heal naturally, but it would take over a month, painful, and you'd need therapy. The boy thought for a moment. Did the Terran do that? The medic blinked. Yes. Then I want that too. The guardian began to protest, but Vectel raised a calming hand. Let him try, Vectel said. Let him remember. In time, other stories would rise. Reese's name would fade from record but linger in the quiet choices of those who followed. The patient who refused sedation. The nurse who walked through a shift on a twisted ankle. The trainee who chose physical rehab over neural adjustment. None of them wanted to be heroes. They just wanted to heal honestly. And in that, humanity left its mark not through power, not through war, but through the simple, unyielding act of enduring pain so others would remember it. In the heart of a coalition designed to fix everything fast and forget it just as quickly, Reese had broken something. and in doing so, let something stronger grow back.